Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni, and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, Melbourne. I'm very, very, very excited to be joined by the wonderful Jeanine, who joins me live in studio today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself. Welcome, Jeanine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very exciting, very exciting. Now, those that don't know, Jeanine is a magnificent and fabulous Palestinian activist and wonderful all-round person, but I'm not going to talk too much about her. I'm going to let her talk about herself. But we're just going to put her on the spot here. Hopefully you'll be able to hear more of her in the future because she'll be joining us more and hopefully lots, but she doesn't know all of that just yet. Welcome, Jeanine.
Thanks.
Now, Jeanine, you're a Palestinian woman, but you've got a very interesting story. I was born in Australia, so I'm an Australian. One of my favourite things, people say, well, they're surprised to meet me if they've heard me on the phone because I sound like us, but I look like them in the generic. You're my undercover sister.
Yeah.
Now, tell us your journey, because I was born here, but you weren't.
Yeah, so my story really begins with my parents. So my mum was raised and grew up during the Lebanese Civil War, and my dad was born and raised in a Palestinian refugee camp in Syria. And so they met in Bahrain, and that's where I was born. And I was born stateless, so I inherited a refugee status from my dad, and there are a lot of things I would have preferred to inherit, but that's what I got. I got refugee status. And we arrived in Australia on the 23rd of February, 1997. And it was quite a long process to get here. So the process to come here really started when my mum was pregnant with me. So that's kind of when my parents, it dawned on them that they were going to be bringing a stateless child into the world, and what that meant in terms of the rights that I would, or in this case wouldn't have access to. So Dad, as a Palestinian, applied to come to Australia, and he had to do an interview as part of that process. And in Bahrain, where they were living at the time, there wasn't an Australian embassy. So he had two options, either to go to Dubai or to go to Saudi Arabia and to do an interview in either of those countries, neither of which would give him a visa as a Palestinian. And so he had a friend of a friend who knew someone at the Greek embassy in Bahrain who got him a visa to go to Athens. So my dad goes to Athens and does his interview there. And as part of that interview, says that my wife's pregnant, I'm about to have my first child, and this is going to be the third generation of stateless, and I really want to break that cycle. And so, they gave us the visas, and we came to Australia a few years later. And
But you were born stateless?
Yeah, I was born stateless. So I became an Australian citizen. I was naturalised when I was 6 years old. Yeah, so, I think for me, the fact that my dad had known someone who got him an interview at the Greek embassy, that was serendipitous. That was luck. And as far as I'm concerned, a system that is based on luck is a broken system. And so for me, I've always acknowledged the part that luck has played in my journey, and always try in everything I do to acknowledge that these systems are so broken and are so based on luck, and that a lot of people haven't been as lucky as I've been. And those of us who have been lucky have a moral obligation for those of us who haven't. And so that kind of has informed a lot of my beliefs and my values in my life. Yeah.
Because, the reality, and if we go to Yarmouk in Syria, but the 6 million Palestinian refugees that have not had the luck your dad, didn't know someone who couldn't get them onto a plane to to Athens to get an interview, and then the wonderful contribution your family has made to Australia. They've languished now 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th generations, and the suffering from Yarmouk through to now into Turkey, and the real desolation that those Palestinians suffered.
Yeah, and the Palestinian refugee camp that my dad grew up in Syria, the people that didn't leave, that stayed there and now have had to endure the Syrian civil war, they were no longer eligible to apply for refugee status a second time, because they're like, well, you've had your go. And so it really adds this extra layer of injustice and extra layer of complexity to
because there's special rules for Palestinians.
Yeah, well,
so you've had your chance. You can't be a refugee forever. And this is part of that, the Zionist push, and certainly Donald Trump's push to defund UNRWA so that they can get rid of the Palestinian problem and have us assimilate, like anybody would take us, even though we built the whole of the Arab world. So that was your journey to here. You're now an Australian, but you didn't stay here for too long.
No. So my parents had quite a hard time in Australia, so we had no family here. My dad's side of the family is really dispersed, so everyone just kind of went to wherever it would take them, and so I've got cousins all over the world now. But my granddad, my mum's dad, was really sick, and so my parents were also struggling, in terms of workplace racism and things like that, and struggling they're very qualified people. My mum was doing a PhD in Australia, and which she ended up finishing from overseas, and my dad had a degree, so they were very kind of educated people, and despite that still really struggled to make ends meet, especially when we first came here. And so we moved to be closer to family, back to Bahrain, and then eventually to Abu Dhabi, where I spent 10 years of my life. And then I came back at 18 to Melbourne for university, and I didn't really, I was so young when we left. I was about 6 or 7, and so didn't really come back to any friends or like a community. I kind of did feel quite isolated, and did exist in a lot of very white spaces at Melbourne Uni, lived on campus, and not necessarily the most inclusive environment. And so it was very easy, like you said, I sound Australian, I'm very white passing, I'm quite pale, I have green eyes, and and so it was very easy for me to just get away with trying to blend in and not talk about Palestine and not talk about my background. I grew up very involved in the cause. My name's Jeanine, for starters, so it was always part.
It's a very good name.
It's a very good name. And so, my name's Jeanine, and so I kind of always explicit in my identity had that connection to Palestine, and also would, especially when we were living in Melbourne, spend every Saturday at protests and every Sunday at Arabic school, and get back to school on Monday and all the white kids would have all been to Auskick, and I'm like, why can't I just go to Auskick with the white kids? Why do I have to go to Arabic school and protests? And so I think, by the time I kind of came back to Australia and was quite isolated and did have that upbringing that was so intensely political. How can it not be? As a Palestinian, I just tried to hide for a while, and didn't really feel very safe saying I was Palestinian in a lot of the spaces that I existed in. And so, it took a while, but I'm back now. And I'm been very involved now in the cause for a few years. I think a lot of young Palestinians struggle a bit in terms of how to navigate a lot of spaces as a young Palestinian. And I think it's important for myself and other kind of younger Palestinians to really set a good example and pave the way for the next generation of Palestinians, because the struggle isn't going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately. I wish it was, but it's not. And so we keep doing this because of our grandparents who were outlived by the occupation. And so that's why we do it, and I think that's important to remember. Yeah,
so the reality, Jeanine, and obviously you embody everything, your father's story and your grandfather's story and your grandmother's is, and as do we, and the debt that we feel encumbered with, that is to advocate for those that are less fortunate.
Yeah.
You know, we do live a privileged life. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you're in Australia with the access to clean drinking water, an iPhone, your fridge has got food in it, we're already in the 1% of the earth. We're already 1%ers. The fact that we can speak about Palestine without a fear of a 2 a.m. knock on the door and opportunity to a re-education centre, you know, we don't have to worry about that. But those that live under the oppression that is occupation and the absolute inhumanity, the open-air prison that is Gaza, you know, we actually feel that, sadly, for many, we see, you and I and many of our like-minded Palestinians, see many Palestinians who've chosen the great Australian dream and assimilation and participation, but not advocacy.
Yeah.
And it hurts our head a little bit.
It does, yeah. It hurts my head and my heart. It really does break my heart, yeah. And I think there's two elements to that. I think, first of all, as Palestinians living in Australia, we do hold so much privilege compared to Palestinians in Palestine, and with that comes a requirement to act in solidarity and to try and elevate the voices of people living on the ground in Palestine because of the freedoms that we do have here to kind of talk about Palestine. But then second of all, like, we are settlers in this country, and even though we were victims of settler colonialism in our homelands, here we are benefactors of it, and I think that as well is a privilege, and I think we also owe it to First Nations people here to also show solidarity. So I think the Palestinian cause is so linked to so many other causes that how can you not kind of draw parallels between First Nations justice and women's rights and you know, like racism and Islamophobia more broadly, and refugee rights and things, and LGBTQI, and, you know, with pinkwashing and greenwashing and the climate. And there are so many opportunities for solidarity that I think aren't being leveraged as much as they could be. And it's a shame because people are powerful when we're together, the power of people and the power of numbers. And it's a shame that that's not currently being leveraged as much as it could be.
And what do you think that is?
I think, well, in the context of Palestine, I think we don't really talk about Palestine in the context of other struggles. I think a lot of Palestinians have, you know, my parents included, have had a pretty hard ride, and so it becomes easy to. My parents are pretty good actually, but it becomes
very good.
It becomes easy to only think of your own cause because that's what directly impacts you. But I think the way we talk about Palestine isn't in the context of First Nations justice, and it isn't in the context of, well, look at Israeli pinkwashing and queer Palestinians, and look at how Israel caused the worst natural or climate disaster in Lebanon's history, but now are going and participating in the climate strike. And so there's all of these kind of contradictions that aren't being recognised and aren't being called out. And I think as Palestinians, we're not talking about Palestine in the context of a struggle for self-determination or a struggle against apartheid. Like, these aren't new concepts. Like, settler colonialism isn't a new concept, apartheid isn't a new concept, but we're not taking them back to their historical roots and acknowledging common struggles with, like, these historical struggles.
So that challenge with intersectionality might exist at a generation above you. And, you know, whilst I celebrate my 50th birthday on International Women's Day, I'm constantly reminding my friends, and you know, it's great that you're here on International Women's Day. Or the day before.
The day before, yeah.
And that you can take the show over as of next week when I can sleep in. The reality is that generation might not have been aware of the concept of intersectionality.
That's true.
But that doesn't forgive your generation. No,
not at all. But, you know, to be fair, I also like...
I'm just being a mean old dad now because I'm 50.
I think that a lot of people, it's not that they know what intersectionality is and have actively rejected it, but I think there is this unwillingness to learn and unwillingness to, like, sit with discomfort, and I think there's this unwillingness to kind of think a bit more outside of just what directly impacts you, and I think that's kind of the problem, the underlying problem.
Okay. So that absolutely explains a lot. And look, one of the challenges that I've always noticed is most Palestinians come to Australia, and we're just talking our context here, with similar stories to your parents.
Yeah.
It's been a struggle, and they get here and they're like, let's just keep our heads down.
Yeah.
You know, we made it out.
Yeah.
Where my challenge is, you know, even though my dad had the same story, he was like, I don't care if you lock me up or shoot me, I'm not going to forget those that I left behind.
Yeah.
And where intersectionality becomes, you know, part of a broader base, in the first instance, we have a responsibility to those we left behind.
Yeah.
But increasingly, we're seeing more of that. Now, you've done some work with APAN.
Yeah.
And we had a Palestine boot camp.
Yeah.
Give me the goss. That sounds
the
cool.
goss. Yeah, so we ran the boot camp earlier this year, and we had 6 amazing participants, and hoping next year it'll be even bigger and even better. And it really came from a need, I think, identified by APAN for there to be more young Palestinian voices in the media and advocacy space. And it was really great. It was run like in collaboration with Democracy in Colour. So Tim Lasordo from Democracy in Colour came and facilitated, and we had some really great Palestinian voices come and speak to us. Yeah, and so it was really, it was really good. And I think that one of the main things that a lot of the participants took out of it was that there's actually like a formula almost to like advocacy and campaigning, and if you've got all the ingredients and you understand how they all work, it actually can become a pretty I wouldn't say simple, but it's formulaic. Yeah, it is. And I also think that a lot of participants also realize that, you know, it's not that complicated. Like, I think a lot of people are put off talking about Palestine because, you know, what if they say, you know, what if they drop the T word, terrorist, and then what do you say? And what if they ask you about Hamas and rah. But I think what was really hammered home was, like, at the end of the day, it is about settler colonialism. It is about apartheid. It is about the right to self-determination. It is about justice. It's about human rights. And, you know, the media and others can try and derail you and ask you about things like Hamas and, like, you know, whether you believe in Israel's legitimate state to exist and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But it's important to bring it back to what it's actually about. And what it's actually about is stolen land and settler colonialism and Indigenous struggle for self-determination. And so I really hope to see more of those voices in the mainstream, because at the moment it feels like there's a few of us, and it would be great to share that burden around a little bit more, because it is hard. Like, it's very hard to...
It's emotionally taxing.
Yeah, very emotionally taxing, and but we do it because we have to, and the more people we can mobilise to do it, the stronger the movement becomes.
Well, the reality, Jeanine, and, you know, a section of your childhood, you weren't in Australia.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm 20 plus years older than you, and I know that in my brothers and I, in our youth, when we said Palestine, they went Pakistan, because the Palestinian cricket team would tour. And so anything that was sort of PA and then Stan became Palestine, not Palestine, but Pakistan. And so the first challenge we had to overcome was that. And then, you know, Palestine became more, you know, it was never a good word in the media, but they heard it a bit more, and so that stereotype has
They could spell it correctly at least.
At
so,
least
yeah.
They actually heard of it. You know, you weren't necessarily a cricketer. Are you a fast bowler or a spin bowler? And then it became, you know, you were synonymous with terrorism, but increasingly, and certainly past 87, the first Intifada, and then the second Intifada, and, you know, blockade, and Israel's an ugly story. It's unpretty. And the thing that
they've packaged it in a very, like, sexy way, though.
But they've spent, you know, millions and billions of dollars in marketing.
Yeah.
And I said this to a woman during the week, and we're talking about advocacy and what we need to do. And I said, the thing about Palestine is we just have to show them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just walking to the window and saying it's daylight.
Yeah.
Because Zionism is actually saying it's nighttime.
Yeah.
Because it's the absolute opposite of what it is.
Yeah.
We just have to take 2 steps and look out the window. See, it's daytime. The difference between our legitimate right for self-determination and Zionism is night and day.
Yeah.
And the parallels between the previous struggles and apartheid. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher was shaking F.W. de Klerk's hand while Nelson Mandela was still on Robben Island.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan didn't want to end apartheid. It was the human beings.
Yeah.
And so all power to you and your crew. And I'm sure there's going to be some in our lifetimes, because I plan to live to at least 100.
Oh, that's good. So we've got 50 years to go.
We're going to do it in under 50 because I want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
30, okay? We'll see a free Palestine. Now, give me your favourite Palestine story. You went...
Yeah. My favourite story from when I was in Palestine.
Or it doesn't have to be when you're in Palestine. It could be a favourite Palestine story.
Well, like one that really kind of one that I always often think about is... So I grew up with my granddad telling me stories of... so he left in 1948 and he was 18 at the time. So he'd lived his whole childhood in Palestine. And he tells me these stories about how Jewish Palestinians and Christian Palestinians and Muslim Palestinians are all living side by side in peaceful coexistence. And the Palestine he spoke of and the Palestine that now I dream of is a Palestine where there is peaceful coexistence regardless of whether you are Jewish or whether you are Muslim or whether you are Christian or whether you don't believe at all. And when I was in Palestine about 2 years ago now, almost not the last December but the December before, we went to the Church of Nativity on Christmas Eve, which was really nice.
Special. Yeah.
It was really special, very, very special. And when we drove in, so we came from Jerusalem, and so we had to cross a checkpoint to get into Bethlehem. And obviously, like the horrors of having to cross a checkpoint, were pertinent.
And you did it.
And we did it in like a very privileged, right? We had a car, we weren't doing it on foot.
So you had the Israeli number plate, so you got to drive on their roads.
Yeah, and we have Australian passports, and so they'd come into the car with guns and check our passports, but they're Australian, so we knew that there was some level of protection there. But once you reach Bethlehem, you almost forget for a moment that you are in occupied territory because, everyone is singing Christmas carols and everyone is just really happy to be there. And there was a young Palestinian marching band going through the streets, and it was just like the most beautiful. Everyone was just really happy to be there, and there was very much this sense of togetherness. And then the call to prayer starts at night, and the carols all stop for the call to prayer. And then the call to prayer ends, and then the carols resume again. And that whole idea of Muslims and Christians living side by side in peaceful coexistence, that's what Palestine is to me. That's the Palestine that my granddad grew up telling me about, and that is my dream for Palestine is for all people of all religions, kind of
colours, sexes,
everything to live side by side and respect each other's differences. Respect that when the Muslim call to prayer is going off, we're going to stop singing our carols, and then when we're done, we'll go and participate in carols with you. Like I'm Muslim, but I went to the church service on Christmas Eve, and so that is. It's a positive story, and it's a story that kind of reinstates my faith in the cause and makes me really believe that coexistence is possible. And yeah, I hope that a Palestine like that exists in our lifetime.
Oh, God willing, absolutely. Because the reality, we our listeners have heard my dad's story many times, and he used to talk about marbles.
Yeah.
And he said, Abraham and Abraham played marbles Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on Friday, Ibrahim went to mosque. On Saturday, Abraham went to temple. On Sunday, Abraham went to church. On Monday, they played marbles together.
Yeah.
But that's sadly, and we talk about the carols stopping for the call to prayer. We know the reality in those magical Palestine times. The same was the case when the synagogues were in service. But today, across Palestine, or 48, the call to prayer is the sound level, the noise level, because it's pollution.
Yeah.
The call to prayer, in Zionism, is in absolute conflict.
Yeah.
Zionism is in conflict to that beautiful picture you painted for us.
Yeah, and when we were in, as a perfect example of that, when we were in Hebron, we were there around the time of lunchtime prayer, and so we decided to go to the mosque and pray. And then when we were done, one of the locals was telling us that the the guy that does the call to prayer has to go up the minaret 5 times a day to do the call to prayer. He has to be accompanied by an IDF soldier 5 times a day to go up, do the call to prayer, and come down. So that's not. They obviously don't think that he is a threat to Israel, but it's just a power play. It's just the fact that we decide whether you do a call to prayer or not. We decide whether the whole area gets to hear the call to prayer or not, and that is just, in my opinion, like the essence of apartheid Israel and control.
The brutality.
Yeah.
Now, Jeanine, you haven't. So the beautiful thing about being Palestinian, and I've often said it to people, is if I wasn't Palestinian, would I, want to have a beer with Duncan because Duncan's my mate, or would I actually care about West Papua and Kashmir and our First Nations peoples, etc.?
Yeah.
And I hope to think that I would.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be a privileged person who went, that's not what I'm doing. Now, the reality is you are continuing the beautifulness of being Palestinian. Tell us a little bit about your work without giving away too many secrets of what you're doing now, what you hope to do.
So I kind of wear 2 hats at the moment. So I work as a researcher at Melbourne Uni on sexual and gender-based violence against refugees. And so one of the main projects I'm working on at the moment is with Syrian and Iraqi refugees around their experiences of violence along their journeys, and looking really at it's part of a 4-country study, so with the UK, Sweden and Turkey, and looking at, areas of where people are specifically at risk to violence, and how we can kind of make journeys safer for people. And, that really does come from, my drive and my passion for doing that sort of work does come from, as I said, like understanding the privilege and luck that I had in my own journey. Yeah, and it's emotionally taxing work. Like, I interview these participants and I see a lot of my own story and the stories that they're telling me, even though I've never experienced sexual gender-based violence in that way. But yeah, so that's kind of one of my hats. And then the other one is I'm co-director of an organisation, called Road to Refuge. And we aim to change the narrative around refugees and asylum seekers, people seeking asylum in Australia, by providing platforms for refugee voices to shape mainstream discourse, which sounds like a mouthful, but essentially we run capacity building programs and kind of events around changing the narrative. And so we have our flagship program, which is called In My Own Words, and that's a capacity building program. And we are actually currently accepting applications for the 2020 cohort. So if you're interested, if you come from a refugee background or refugee-like background and are interested in sharing your story, please apply.
How would they apply, Jeanine?
On our website, so roadtorefuge.com, and then there's just a little tab called In My Own Words, and you can just click.
Roadtorefuge.com.
Yes. And then we also are running a regional exhibit at the moment in Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong and Shepparton of stories from detention. So it's an audio-visual exhibit called They Cannot Take the Sky. And we're doing some community engagement, so photography and poetry workshops in each of those areas alongside that. And I think like realising how long it took me to kind of come out as a Palestinian and to tell my own story. And then when I did tell my story, like realising how powerful it was in changing hearts and minds, really has kind of inspired me to encourage other people to tell their own stories, and really kind of take ownership back instead of being talked about, for us to be the ones kind of deciding what gets said about us. So that's, yeah.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes, or less than a minute to go, Jeanine. International Women's Day, you're an inspirational woman. Tell us about Palestinian women.
Yeah. I mean, I think as Palestinian women, especially women living on the ground, I think there's almost like this triple burden placed on them. So there's the occupation, which is the first burden. Then there's almost like trying to challenge the patriarchy within our own community, which isn't to say that the patriarchy is a Palestinian problem or an Arab problem, but is to say that it exists everywhere in different forms. And as Palestinian women, we do kind of push against a lot of patriarchal norms in our societies. And then there's the white supremacy and that we try and push outside of our community. So I think something I found really hard has been trying to change patriarchal structures within our own communities.